My girlfriend cheated with her boss and told me, "He's a real leader. You're just a clerk." She didn't know I owned the company. I personally signed their termination letters during their secret lunch. Now they're unemployed, and I'm selling her car to cover her legal fees. So my girlfriend of 3 years called me a clerk in front of her coworkers at the company Christmas party, the company I own. Let me back up. My name is Jake, and I run a commercial cleaning services company called Apex Facilities Management. We handle contracts for office buildings, medical facilities, and corporate campuses across Ohio and parts of Indiana. Nothing flashy, no Silicon Valley energy, just a solid business that my grandfather started in 1978, my father built up through the 80s and 90s, and I inherited when my dad passed away 6 years ago. My grandfather was a janitor at a high school in Cleveland, worked there for 30 years, saved every penny. Then one day he decided he was tired of making someone else money and started his own crew. 3 guys, a van, and a lot of hustle. By the time my dad took over, it was a real company. 50 employees, commercial contracts, the works. My dad doubled it, then tripled it. Turned Apex into the kind of business where Fortune 500 companies trusted us to keep their facilities spotless. I grew up watching my dad negotiate contracts with executives who looked down on him because he cleaned their buildings. Watched him shake their hands, smile, take their money, and build something they could never take away from him. He taught me that the people who underestimate you are the ones you beat. Every single time. Here's the thing about owning a service business. Nobody thinks you're rich. Nobody thinks you're impressive. You don't have a fancy job title that makes people's eyes light up at parties. When someone asks what you do and you say commercial cleaning services, they picture a guy pushing a mop, which is fine. I've pushed plenty of mops in my life. Started doing it at 14 when my dad made me work summers. Nothing wrong with honest work. But Apex has 140 employees. Contracts worth $12 million a year, and I take home a comfortable 7 figures after expenses. I drive a 10-year-old truck because I like it. I live in a modest house because I grew up in one. And I dress like a normal guy because I am one. My girlfriend Brittany never quite understood this. We met 3 years ago at a friend's barbecue. She was 28, worked as an administrative coordinator at a property management firm, and seemed genuinely down to earth, pretty, funny, had this way of making me feel like she was actually listening when I talked. Looking back, that was probably the setup. The first few months were great. We'd grab dinner at regular restaurants, go to movies, watch games at my place on the weekends. Nothing fancy, nothing expensive, just 2 normal people getting to know each other. Brittany talked about her dreams, wanted to advance in her career, wanted stability, wanted a partner who had his act together. I appreciated that. She seemed grounded. She never asked about my finances, never pushed for expensive dates or fancy gifts, never mentioned wanting a sugar daddy situation or someone to fund her lifestyle. At least, that's what I thought at the time. Looking back, I realized she was playing a longer game, testing me first, same as I was testing her. She just happened to be better at hiding her true motives. About 8 months into our relationship, Brittany mentioned she was unhappy at her job. The pay was low, her boss was difficult, and she felt like she had no room to grow. I made a decision that seemed reasonable at the time. I offered her a position at Apex. Now I need to explain how my company is structured. I don't work out of the main office, never have. My dad set it up that way, and I kept the tradition. The main office is downtown, handles all the administration, scheduling, and client coordination. I work out of a small satellite office about 20 minutes away. It's quiet, it's private, and it keeps me separate from the day-to-day drama that inevitably happens when you put 50 people in a building together. Most of the employees at the main office have never met me in person. They know the owner exists, they see my signature on their paychecks, but the face they associate with leadership is my general manager, a guy named Warren Prescott, who's been running operations since before I took over. Warren knows the full picture. He reports directly to me. But to everyone else, Warren is the boss, the big dog, the guy who makes decisions. And that's exactly how I want it. I learned a long time ago that people act different when they know the owner is watching. I prefer to see how things really run. So when Brittany came to work at Apex, she had no idea I owned the company. I told her I worked in vendor management for a mid-sized business, which was technically true. I manage vendors. I also manage everything else. Was it deceptive? Maybe. But I'd been burned before by women who suddenly got a lot more interested once they found out about my financial situation. I wanted to see who Brittany really was when she thought I was just an average guy with an average job. For a while, things were fine. She started as an administrative assistant in the scheduling department. She was competent. Not exceptional, but competent. She got along with her coworkers. She seemed happy. Then about a year and a half ago, we hired a new regional director named Grant Foster. Grant was 34, came from a competitor, and had the kind of resume that looks impressive on paper. MBA from a state school, 10 years in the facilities management industry, a smooth talker who knew how to work a room. Warren brought him on to help expand our operations into Kentucky. I was skeptical from the start. Grant had this polish to him that felt rehearsed, like he'd spent too much time reading books about executive presence and not enough time actually doing the work. But Warren vouched for him, said he had good ideas and strong industry connections. I trusted Warren. Might have been my first mistake. I met Grant exactly twice. Once during his final interview, where I posed as a consultant reviewing candidates for Warren, and once at a company golf outing, where I was introduced as a friend of Warren's who did some work for the company. Grant had this way of talking over people, interrupting mid-sentence to make his own point, taking credit for ideas that weren't his. Classic corporate climber behavior. I'd seen his type before. Grant had no idea who I was, but he definitely noticed Brittany. The signs started small. Brittany would mention Grant's name in conversation. Grant said this in the meeting today. Grant thinks the company should do that. Grant has such good ideas. Grant is so driven. At first, I didn't think much of it. People talk about their coworkers, especially new coworkers who make a big impression. Grant was clearly the type to make an impression, but then the mentions got more frequent and more personal. Grant has this great sense of humor. Grant told me about this restaurant he loves. Grant thinks I have real potential to move up in the company. I'm not an insecure guy. People can have work friends. People can admire their colleagues. But there was a tone in her voice when she talked about Grant, a kind of breathless admiration that sounded familiar. It sounded like the way she used to talk about me. 6 months ago, things started getting weird. Brittany became protective of her phone, started keeping it face down all the time, started taking it with her to the bathroom, started angling the screen away from me when she was texting. One night, about 5 months ago, we were having dinner and Brittany's phone buzzed. She grabbed it fast, faster than normal, looked at the screen, smiled, then put it face down on the table. I asked who it was. She said just work stuff, nothing important. I didn't push, but I noticed. She started working late more often, 2 nights a week at first, then 3, always vague about what projects required so much overtime. She signed up for a gym membership and suddenly cared a lot about how she looked. New clothes, new makeup, new interest in looking put together for work, classic checklist stuff, every sign in the book. I didn't say anything. I just watched. 3 months ago, I made a quiet request to Warren. I asked him to pull the security card access logs for the main office. Specifically, I wanted to see when Grant was entering and leaving the building after hours, and if anyone else's card was swiping in around the same times. Warren came back with the data 2 days later. Grant Foster had been staying late 3 nights a week for the past 4 months, and Brittany's card was swiping in between 15 and 30 minutes after his. Then both cards would swipe out together, within minutes of each other, usually around 9 or 10 at night. I asked Warren if there was any legitimate work reason for this pattern. There was not. I sat with that information for a while, processed it, thought about what I wanted to do. I could have confronted Brittany immediately, could have fired Grant on the spot for having an inappropriate relationship with a subordinate, could have made a big dramatic scene, but I'm not a dramatic person. I'm a strategic one, and more importantly, I wanted to see how far this would go. I wanted to see exactly who Brittany really was when she thought nobody was watching. So I kept quiet, kept playing the role of the clueless boyfriend with the boring job, kept going home every night to a woman who kissed me on the cheek and asked about my day while hiding an entire other relationship. 2 months ago, Brittany started dropping hints about our finances. She suggested we should combine bank accounts since we'd been together for 3 years. She asked pointed questions about my retirement savings. She wondered aloud whether I was saving enough for our future. The subtext was clear. She was trying to figure out exactly how much I was worth. Probably trying to determine whether I was worth keeping around as a backup plan, while she tested the waters with Grant. I gave her vague answers, told her I was doing okay, that I had some savings, that we could talk about the future eventually. She wasn't satisfied. 1 month ago, Brittany asked me to come to the company Christmas party. I said no at first. I never attend company events at the main office. The whole point of my setup is to stay invisible. But Brittany pushed hard. Said it would mean a lot to her. Said she wanted to show me off to her coworkers. Against my better judgment, I agreed. The party was at a rented event space downtown. About 80 employees, plus some spouses, and significant others. Warren was there. Grant was there. And I was there, dressed in khakis and a button-down, like the regular guy Brittany thought I was. For the first hour, everything was fine. I met some of Brittany's work friends, made small talk about sports and the weather. Nobody recognized me. Why would they? Brittany introduced me around as her boyfriend Jake. She kept the descriptions vague, said I worked for a company that did vendor management stuff, said I was dependable, said we'd been together for 3 years. I noticed she never used words like ambitious or successful or impressive, just dependable, reliable, steady. At one point, a woman from HR asked what company I worked for. Before I could answer, Brittany jumped in and changed the subject. Said it was boring business stuff. Nobody wanted to hear about vendor contracts at a Christmas party. Warren caught that exchange from across the room, raised an eyebrow at me. I shrugged almost imperceptibly. Then Grant walked over. He was dressed sharp, expensive suit, designer watch, the whole package. He shook my hand with that aggressive grip some guys do when they're trying to establish dominance. Introduced himself. Asked what I did for a living. I told him I worked in vendor management. He nodded with this barely concealed smirk, like I'd just confirmed something he already suspected. Then he spent the next 20 minutes holding court, talking loudly about his vision for the company's expansion, his leadership philosophy, his plans to eventually move up to COO. Warren was standing nearby, listening with a perfectly neutral expression. We made eye contact once. He raised an eyebrow slightly. I shook my head almost imperceptibly. Not yet. At some point, Brittany wandered over and stood next to Grant. Not next to me, next to him. And she looked up at him with this expression I hadn't seen in a long time. Admiration, attraction, the way she used to look at me back when she thought I was impressive. Then Grant said something that changed everything. He was talking about leadership, about what separates the people who run things from the people who just follow orders. And he turned to me with this condescending smile and said, "No offense, Jake, but some people are just born to lead. Others are more suited to support roles. Nothing wrong with being a good clerk." Before I could respond, Brittany laughed. Not a polite laugh, a genuine laugh, like he'd said something hilarious and true. Then she said it. "Grant's a real leader. Jake's just a clerk, but he's reliable, like a golden retriever. You know?" The whole group laughed. I stood there for a moment, let the words sink in. Watched my girlfriend of 3 years compare me to a dog in front of the man she was sleeping with. Then I smiled, excused myself, and walked over to Warren. I told him I was leaving, that I'd be in touch tomorrow, that things were about to change. Warren nodded. He'd been in the game long enough to know what that tone meant. I went home that night and slept surprisingly well. The next morning, I called Warren and told him to schedule a board review for the following week. I wanted a complete audit of Grant Foster's department, performance metrics, expense reports, client satisfaction surveys, the works. Then I called my attorney. Grant's employment contract had a standard morality clause. Most management-level contracts do. It prohibits relationships with subordinates without disclosure to HR. It prohibits conduct that reflects poorly on the company. It prohibits conflicts of interest. Grant had violated all three. Brittany's situation was more complicated. She wasn't technically a subordinate of Grant's. She worked in a different department. But the company handbook specifically addressed workplace relationships that could create conflicts of interest or appearance of impropriety. More importantly, Brittany had signed an employment agreement when she started, one that included a clause about misrepresenting her relationship to company leadership. See, when Brittany was hired, she was asked directly whether she had any personal relationships with current employees or management that might create a conflict of interest. She said no. She was dating the owner. That was a material misrepresentation. Grounds for termination. But I wasn't going to fire them yet. I wanted to do this properly. Document everything. Make it airtight. Over the next 2 weeks, I gathered evidence. Security logs. Expense reports showing Grant had been charging intimate dinners to his corporate card and marking them as client entertainment. Email records showing after-hours communication between the two of them. Performance reviews showing Brittany had received 2 raises in 18 months despite average evaluations. The expense reports were particularly damning. Grant had been billing the company for dinners at upscale restaurants almost every week. Italian places, steakhouses, that fancy sushi spot downtown, all marked as client entertainment, but there was no corresponding client contact in our system. He'd been funding his affair on my dime for months. The emails were more subtle, nothing explicit. Grant was smart enough to keep the work communications professional, but there was a pattern. Messages sent late at night, inside jokes that didn't make sense in a work context, casual language that you don't use with a colleague you're not sleeping with. The performance reviews sealed it. Brittany had received a 7% raise 6 months ago, even though her supervisor had rated her as meeting expectations, not exceeding them. Then another 5% raise 3 months later, both approved by Grant. Grant had been manipulating the system, using his authority to benefit the woman he was sleeping with. Classic abusive position. I had everything I needed. The board meeting happened on a Tuesday. It was just me, Warren, and our corporate counsel. We reviewed the evidence, discussed the legal exposure, and made a unanimous decision. Grant Foster was terminated for cause. Multiple violations of his employment agreement, abuse of corporate resources, and failure to disclose a personal relationship that created a conflict of interest. Brittany was terminated for cause, material misrepresentation during the hiring process, and accepting benefits derived from an undisclosed inappropriate relationship. I signed both termination letters personally, but I didn't execute them immediately. I had one more thing planned. The following Thursday, I asked Warren to organize a working lunch meeting with the regional directors. Just a casual thing. Sandwiches and strategy discussion. Grant was expected to attend, of course. At 11:45 that morning, Grant and Brittany left the office together. Security cameras caught them getting into his car. They drove to a restaurant about 15 minutes away. A nice Italian place where they apparently thought nobody from work would see them. They were right. Nobody from work saw them. I did. I arrived at the restaurant at noon, walked in, spotted them at a corner table, and sat down across from them. The look on their faces was something I'll remember for a long time. Grant's face went white. His fork stopped halfway to his mouth. His jaw actually dropped open like something from a cartoon. Brittany dropped her fork. It clattered against the plate loud enough to make people at nearby tables look over. Her hand was shaking. I introduced myself, my real name, my real title, owner and CEO of Apex Facilities Management. The silence stretched out for what felt like minutes. In reality, it was probably about 30 seconds, but 30 seconds of absolute frozen shock from two people who had just realized their entire world was about to collapse. Grant was the first to speak, started stammering, tripping over his words, trying to explain, trying to spin, saying he had no idea, that this was all a misunderstanding, that he would never have acted this way if he'd known. The excuses came out in a jumbled rush. He thought I was just some guy. He didn't know about the company connection. He and Brittany were in love. It wasn't what it looked like. I held up my hand and stopped him. I told him I didn't need his explanation. I'd already seen the security log, the expense report, the emails. I knew exactly what had been going on, and for how long. Then I took out the termination letters, both of them, already signed. I handed Grant his first, watched him read it, watched the color drain from his face as he realized his career at Apex was over, and that the termination for cause would follow him to any reference check. Then I handed Brittany hers. She didn't read it at first. She just stared at me, then at the letter, then back at me. Finally, she found her voice. She asked how I could do this. We'd been together for 3 years. She'd trusted me. I'd lied to her about who I really was. I let that hang in the air for a moment. Then I reminded her that she'd been sleeping with another man for at least 6 months, that she'd laughed at me in front of my own employees, that she'd called me a clerk and compared me to a dog. I pulled out my phone and showed her a screenshot of the security log from 3 nights ago. Her card swiping in at 8:30, swiping in at 8. Grant's card swiping in at 8:15. Both cards swiping out at 10:47. Same pattern for the past 4 months. Then I showed her the expense reports. The dinners at Italian restaurants marked as client entertainment, the fancy steakhouse visits, the sushi place, all billed to the company, all dates that matched up with their late-night security swipes. I asked her if she wanted to talk about trust and honesty now. She started crying. Grant tried to jump in, started threatening, said he would sue for wrongful termination, said he had an attorney, said I'd made a huge mistake. I told him his termination was completely justified under the morality clause of his contract, that I had documented evidence of expense fraud, abuse of authority, and failure to disclose, that if he wanted to sue, my legal team would be happy to countersue for the misappropriated corporate funds. His attorney could contact my attorney. He shut up after that. I stood up, left enough cash on the table to cover their lunch, and walked out. That night, Brittany came home to pack her things. I'd already changed the locks, but I let her in to get her stuff. I stood in the living room and watched her fill boxes while she cried and yelled and alternated between apologizing and blaming me for everything. The cycle was almost predictable. First, she'd cry and say she was sorry, that she never meant for things to go this far, that she still loved me. Then she'd get angry and say this was all my fault for lying about who I was. Then back to crying. Then back to anger. At one point, she threw a picture frame across the room. It was a photo of us from our first anniversary trip. The glass shattered against the wall and the frame cracked in half. I didn't react, just stood there with my arms crossed. That seemed to make her angrier than anything else. She wanted a reaction, wanted me to yell back, wanted some kind of emotional engagement that would make her feel less alone in her meltdown. I gave her nothing. At one point, she demanded to know why I hadn't just told her who I was from the beginning. I told her the truth, that I'd wanted to see who she really was when she thought I had nothing to offer. And now I knew. She called me cold, calculating, manipulative. I told her she was describing herself. She threw another item at the wall, a coffee mug this time. It shattered and left a brown stain on the paint. I still didn't react. Finally, around midnight, she ran out of things to yell about, ran out of things to throw, ran out of energy. She just stood there in the middle of the living room, surrounded by boxes and broken glass, looking lost. For a second, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then I remembered the look on her face when she called me a golden retriever, the way she laughed at me in front of everyone, the months of lies and deception. The moment passed. She loaded her boxes into her car and drove off to stay with her sister. Didn't say goodbye, didn't look back. I spent the next hour cleaning up the broken glass and scrubbing the coffee stain off the wall. Then I poured myself a glass of water, sat down on the couch, and turned on the TV. I slept fine that night. Here's where things get interesting. Brittany's car, the nice Honda Accord she'd been driving for the past 2 years. She thought she owned it. Her name was on the registration. She made the monthly payments. But the loan was in my name. We'd gotten the car together about 18 months ago. Her credit wasn't great, so I co-signed to help her get a better interest rate. Then, because I'm apparently a complete idiot who makes decisions with his heart instead of his head, I put myself as the primary borrower and her as the co-signer. The title was in her name, but the debt was mine. 2 days after she moved out, Brittany stopped making payments. I found out when my bank sent me a notification. The payment was missed. As the primary borrower, I was now responsible. I called the bank, explained the situation, asked about my options. As the primary borrower, I had the right to take possession of the vehicle to protect my credit interest, especially since the co-signer had abandoned the loan. I had the car towed from her sister's driveway the following weekend. The tow truck showed up at 7 in the morning on a Saturday. I was there to make sure everything went smoothly. Signed the paperwork, watched them hook up the car, drove off behind the truck to the dealership where I'd already arranged a sale. Brittany's sister came running out of the house in her bathrobe around the time they were hooking up the car, started screaming at the tow truck driver, demanded to know what was happening, threatened to call the police. The driver handed her a copy of the repossession paperwork, explained that the primary borrower had the legal right to recover the vehicle when payments weren't being made, told her she could call whoever she wanted, but the car was leaving. She called Brittany while they were still loading it up. About 20 minutes later, my phone started blowing up. Brittany called me screaming, said I'd stolen her car, said she was going to call the cops, said I was going to jail. I told her to go ahead and call. The cops would explain that the primary borrower repossessing a vehicle to protect their credit interest wasn't theft. It was completely legal. She called me every name in the book, said I was petty, said I was vindictive, said I'd regret this. I told her I'd already regretted plenty of things about our relationship. This wasn't going to be one of them. She hung up. I sold the car 3 weeks later, got a decent price from a dealership, used the money to pay off the loan, and pocketed the difference. But that difference is already spoken for. See, Brittany made some poor decisions in the weeks after our breakup. She started telling people I'd fired her for personal reasons, that I was a vindictive ex who abused his power to ruin her career. She posted about it on social media, named me, named the company. The first post went up about a week after she moved out. It was vague, something about toxic men who can't handle rejection, about companies that let personal grudges affect professional decisions, about how some people reveal who they really are when they don't get what they want. Her friends jumped in the comments with support, said she was so strong, said she deserved better, said karma would take care of things. Then the post got more specific. She named Apex Facilities Management directly, said she'd been fired without cause, said the owner had a personal vendetta against her, said she was consulting with an attorney about wrongful termination. She didn't name me by name, but she didn't have to. Anyone who knew both of us could connect the dots. Her post got a decent amount of traction, lots of sympathetic comments from people who only heard her side of the story. A few people shared her posts. Someone even left a 1-star review on our company's business page, saying they'd never hire a company that treated employees this way. Warren forwarded me the review, asked if I wanted him to respond. I told him to leave it alone for now. Let her keep talking. Give her enough rope. My attorney sent her a cease and desist letter 2 weeks after the first post, pointed out that her statements were defamatory, that she was making false claims about the reasons for her termination, that she'd signed a separation agreement, acknowledging the termination was for cause. The letter explained that continued defamatory statements would result in legal action, that any damages to the company's reputation would be pursued aggressively, that she should consult with an attorney before posting anything further. She didn't stop. We filed a defamation lawsuit 3 weeks ago. The complaint was 32 pages long. It documented every false statement she'd made, every social media post, every comment, every share. It included screenshots, timestamps, and engagement metrics showing how far her lies had spread. It named specific damages, the 1-star review that had to be addressed, The potential client who'd asked questions about the company's workplace practices after seeing her posts. The time and resources spent on reputation management. My attorney included copies of her termination paperwork, the separation agreement she'd signed, the documented evidence of her misconduct, everything that proved her public statements were not just opinions, but demonstrably false claims of fact. She got served at her sister's house on a Tuesday morning. The process server reported that she refused to answer the door at first. Her sister eventually accepted service on her behalf. Apparently, she thought I was bluffing. I don't bluff. The lawsuit triggered a minor panic on her end. Her social media went quiet for about a week. Then she posted something vague about being silenced by powerful people who couldn't handle the truth. Got a bunch of supportive comments. Then she deleted that post too, probably on advice from whatever attorney she'd managed to hire. Her attorney contacted mine last week, said they wanted to discuss resolution, offered a public apology and removal of all posts in exchange for dropping the suit. I told my attorney to reject the offer. I wanted damages for the harm to my reputation, for the harm to my company's reputation, for the legal costs I'd incurred. More importantly, I wanted it on record that she'd lied. I wanted a legal document that would follow her forever. The case is ongoing. Discovery starts next month. I'm told her legal fees are already substantial. Her attorney isn't cheap, and defamation cases take time she has to pay for, hence the car situation. The money from the sale is sitting in an escrow account. When we win the lawsuit, and we will, I'll apply it toward whatever judgment we get. As for Grant, I heard through the industry grapevine that he's having trouble finding work. Turns out that when you get fired for cause from a management position, and the termination letter specifically cites expense fraud and inappropriate workplace conduct, other companies in the industry hear about it. The facilities management industry isn't that big. Everybody knows everybody. People talk at conferences. They compare notes on candidates. They call around when someone applies with a termination on their record. Grant applied to 3 of our competitors within the first month after his termination. All 3 called Warren for a reference. Warren told them the truth, that Grant had been terminated for cause, that there were documented issues with expense reporting, that there had been an inappropriate relationship with a subordinate. He didn't editorialize, didn't add color, just stated the facts. The facts were enough. All 3 companies passed on Grant. He tried smaller companies after that, regional outfits that might be desperate enough to overlook his history. A couple of them called too. Warren gave them the same information. Word started getting around. Grant Foster was radioactive. Nobody wanted to touch him. Last I heard, Grant was doing consulting work, which in this industry means he's unemployed and trying to put a positive spin on it, probably taking whatever freelance projects he can find while he waits for people to forget. They won't forget. The industry has a long memory. Brittany tried to get unemployment benefits, filed her claim about 2 weeks after the termination. The state sent a questionnaire to Apex asking about the circumstances of her separation. We responded with documentation, the termination letter, the separation agreement, the evidence of misconduct that led to the termination for cause. The state denied her claim. Termination for cause due to documented policy violations doesn't qualify for unemployment benefits. She appealed, lost the appeal. The documentation I'd compiled was thorough. I heard from a mutual friend that she was furious, said the system was rigged, said I had connections, said the whole thing was a conspiracy to destroy her life. The system wasn't rigged. I don't have connections at the unemployment office. The whole thing was just consequences. Her consequences for her choices. Update. 3 months later. The defamation case settled 6 weeks ago. It took 3 rounds of negotiations to get there. Brittany's attorney initially tried to lowball us, offered a private apology and post-removal with no financial component. My attorney rejected it immediately. The second offer included $5,000 in damages, still way below what we were asking for. We rejected that too. Her attorney called the next day, said his client was running out of resources, said she couldn't afford to take this to trial, asked if we could find a middle ground. We settled on $15,000 in damages plus my attorney's fees. She had to sign a comprehensive non-disparagement agreement that covered not just social media, but any public statement about me, Apex, or the circumstances of her termination. 1 violation, and we'd be back in court, this time with breach of contract on top of the original defamation claims. The most important piece was the written statement. She had to sign a document, witnessed and notarized, admitting that her social media posts contained false information about the circumstances of her termination, that she was terminated for cause based on documented misconduct, that her statements about wrongful termination and personal vendettas were not accurate. That written statement now exists as a legal document, signed and notarized, confirming that she was terminated for cause based on documented misconduct and not because of any personal relationship issues. If she ever tries to spin the story again, that document will follow her. Any employer who does a thorough background check will find it. Any future relationship where she tries to play victim will have a paper trail. She'll be carrying this forever. The money from the car sale plus the settlement covered all my legal expenses with a few thousand left over. I donated the remainder to a local charity that helps people get back on their feet after difficult situations. Grant finally landed a job last month, not in facilities management. He's working as an assistant manager at a retail store, making probably a third of what he made at Apex. Significant step down from regional director. I found out through the industry network. Someone saw him at a big box store wearing a name tag and a polo shirt. Word got around. Brittany moved back in with her parents about 2 months ago. Her sister apparently got tired of the drama. I heard they had a big fight about the constant stress and negativity. The sister wanted her life back. Last I heard, Brittany was doing temp work and trying to figure out her next move. Administrative stuff mostly. Nothing permanent. Nothing with benefits. Just whatever she can find week to week. We haven't spoken since the settlement was signed. I don't expect we ever will. As for me, things are good. The company had its best quarter ever. We're expanding into Michigan now. A woman named Patricia, who actually knows what she's doing, is handling the Kentucky territory that Grant was supposed to develop. I started dating someone new about 2 months ago. Her name is Monica. She's an accountant, has her own career, her own money, her own life. I told her on our second date that I own Apex. Showed her the corporate filings and everything. She said, "Oh, that's nice. Do you want to split the check or should I get this one?" I think I'm going to like her. Second update. 6 months later, I was at an industry conference in Columbus last week. Annual thing, lots of networking, vendor showcases, panel discussions about regulatory changes. Standard stuff. The conference was at one of the big convention hotels downtown. About 500 people from companies all over the Midwest. Lots of handshakes, lots of business cards, lots of conversations about market trends and operational challenges. I'd been there for 2 days already, had a few productive meetings with potential clients, touched base with some vendors we work with, caught up with Warren about a few operational issues back home. During one of the lunch breaks on the third day, I was standing by the coffee station when someone tapped my shoulder. It was Grant. He looked different, less polished. The expensive suit was gone, replaced by something off the rack that didn't quite fit right. The designer watch was missing. The confident swagger had deflated into something closer to nervous energy. For a second, I thought about walking away, just turning around and finding somewhere else to be. But he'd already seen me, and he wasn't being aggressive, just standing there with this uncertain expression, waiting to see if I'd give him a chance to speak. He asked if we could talk, just for a few minutes. Said he had something he wanted to say. I told him I'd give him 5 minutes. We found a quiet corner away from the crowd, a little seating area near the emergency exit where nobody was paying attention. Grant apologized. Not the defensive, excuse-filled kind of apology I'd heard from him at the restaurant. This was different. He said he'd been arrogant and stupid, that he'd convinced himself the rules didn't apply to him, that losing everything had forced him to take a hard look at himself. He talked about the past 6 months, the job rejections, the financial strain, the humiliation of going from regional director to retail assistant manager, the realization that he'd thrown away everything he'd worked for because he thought he was too smart to get caught. He wasn't asking for his job back. He wasn't asking for forgiveness either. He just wanted me to know that he understood now, that the consequences I'd imposed had been fair. Then he shook my hand and walked away. I stood there for a minute, processing. Later that evening, I was at the conference reception when I ran into the CEO of one of our competitors. Guy named Richard. We've known each other casually for years. Compete for some of the same contracts, but it's all cordial. Richard mentioned that Grant had applied to his company a few months back. Said he'd been impressed by Grant's resume, but concerned about the termination, so he'd called around. Then he said something that surprised me. He said he'd recently heard that Grant was volunteering with a nonprofit that helps formerly incarcerated people find employment. That Grant had apparently started mentoring guys who were trying to rebuild their lives after making bad choices. Richard thought that said something about character, about growth. He asked if I'd have any objection to him giving Grant a second chance. I thought about it for a moment. Then I told Richard the truth, that Grant had made serious mistakes at my company, that those mistakes had consequences, but that I wasn't in the business of holding grudges forever. If Richard wanted to give Grant an opportunity, I wouldn't stand in his way. Richard thanked me and moved on to work the room. Brittany still hasn't apologized, still posts passive-aggressive things on social media that are obviously about me without naming me. Something last month about narcissists who destroy people's lives. Something the week before about surviving toxic relationships with men who have too much power. Her sister blocked me months ago, which I find hilarious since I never followed her in the first place. Warren announced last week that he's thinking about retiring in a couple years. He's been running operations since my dad's time. We're already talking about succession planning. I might need to become more visible at the main office after all. Monica and I are still together. Things are going really well. She met my mom last month. We're talking about moving in together in the spring. She doesn't care about the company, doesn't care about the money, just like spending time together. The company just landed our biggest contract ever, a hospital system with facilities across 3 states. Patricia is handling the implementation. She's doing better than Grant ever did with Kentucky. Life is good. Thanks for reading. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel and help us bring you more and better stories. Thanks.